Franz Kafka was 36 years old when Milena's translation of the Stoker appeared in the Tribune. He had published 2 collections of short stories, Meditation and The Country Doctor, as well as The Judgment, The Metamorphosis, and In the Penal Colony. He had written The Trial, still he was virtually unknown, and did little to advance his fame. None of the authors with whom we are connected comes to us with wishes or questions so seldom as you do. And with none of them do we have the feeling that the outward fate of the published books is a matter of such indifference as it is with you, wrote his publisher, Kurt Wolff. He had passed through the major crisis in his life. Much to his father's dismay, he had twice broken his engagement to Felice Bauer, and again to his father's disapproval, he was still involved with Julie Wojcicki. Following a diagnosis of tuberculosis in 1917, he had curtailed his duties at the insurance company. He often went away on cure, and in the spring of 1920 he travelled to Meran, where he wrote the first letters to Milena that have survived. What began as a business correspondence soon started to consume his sleep, and he noted in a letter to Max Brod from May 1920. It goes like this: "My health would be good if I could sleep. It's true I've gained some weight, but recently my insomnia has been almost unbearable. This probably has several reasons, one of which may be my correspondence with Verena. She is a living fire, such as I have never seen. Incidentally, a fire that despite everything burns only for him. At the same time, she is extremely tender, brave, intelligent, and sacrifices everything, or if you prefer, acquires everything by sacrifice. Him, of course, refers to Ernst Pollack. Kafka admired Milena's husband not least for his success with women, but his admiration was mingled with an awareness of Milena's suffering as well as with his own feelings of guilt. For his part, Pollack kept his distance, though in the letters we can sense his presence, a distant emissary of unseen powers, like Clum in the Castle. In fact, much of Kafka's last novel derives from his relationship with Milena, but as Max Brod writes in his biography, within quotes, the version of the love affair as given in the novel is to be regarded as a bitter caricature. Reality was more generous and merciful than the novel's picture of it. He felt compelled to distrust and denigrate his own emissions. Reality gave to Kafka those moments of happiness that shine forth from the glorious pages of the first letters, gave him the letters, unfortunately destroyed, of Milena and his own rapturous cries of gratitude." Close quote. If this rapture found any physical expression, it was confined to 2 tyrists. The first in Vienna from June 29th to July 4th, 1920, and the next 6 weeks later in the border town of Gmund. Vienna came to represent an idle bliss, the fragments of 4 days snatched from the night. Gmund, on the other hand, was a disaster of unfulfillment. The letters themselves do not merely reflect the stages of the relationships, they are the relationship. In fact, explains their focus on mail, their apparent obsession with post offices, stationery, stamps. Along with certain logistical arrangements, these were the only minutiae that kept the couple bound to earth. No other jagged details of everyday life impeded mutual identification. Kafka soon felt trapped in an unhappy marriage. Milena felt his disease in her lungs, but it was precisely this empathy which ultimately marred Franz and Milena in each other's problems, until the letters became pure anguish, the anguish that pulls its plough through the sleep. Breaking off the correspondence, Kafka again went away on cure, this time to Tatra Mountains, where he again wrote to Max Brod. Within quotes, "I hardly slept myself, but 2 things consoled me. First, there were heavy pains in my heart, and then after a series of dreams I had this one. A child wearing a little shirt was sitting to my left. I couldn't remember whether it was my own child or not, but this didn't bother me. Milena was on my right. Both were cuddling up against me, and I was telling them a story about my pocketbook, which I had lost, but then recovered, although I hadn't yet looked inside and didn't know whether the money was still there. But even if it had been lost, it didn't matter, so long as the two were by my side. Close quotes. As happiness receded into dreams, the passion ended where it began, in sleeplessness. The lovers never really recovered the 4 days spent in Vienna. These letters were their only progeny, and the ghosts consumed any consolation. The easy possibility of writing letters, wrote Franz Kafka to Milena must have brought wrack and ruin to the souls of the world. Writing letters is actually an intercourse with ghosts, by no means just with the ghost of the addressee, but also with one's own ghost, which secretly evolves inside the letter one is writing, or even in a whole series of letters where one letter corroborates another and can refer to it as witness. Milena's own ghost, or ghosts, still haunt his letters to Milena. Nowhere else does he reveal himself more completely, for to no one did he bare his soul so utterly as to Milena Jasinska. One can tell you the truth like no one else, he wrote to her, and no one can tell you the truth both for one's own sake and for yours. In fact, one can even discover one's own truth directly through you. Close quote. Franz and Milena's relationship reflected the contradictions of Kafka's Prague, Jew, Gentile, German, Czech, although between them these differences accounted for more concord than conflict. Perhaps both enjoyed foreignness for their own sake. As the letters prove, however, their bond ran much deeper than mere affinity, so deep in fact that Kafka gave Milena all his diaries, but the one he was still writing. And in the last notebook he wrote always M, or not M, but a principle, a light in the darkness. Milena Jasinska's profession amplifies the uniqueness among the women in Kafka's life. She was the only writer. And although her letters were destroyed, we can still hear her voice, or at least its echoes in passages quoted by Kafka, in letters she wrote to Max Brod, and in her own articles and essays, some of which appear here for the first time in English. Letters to Milena was first edited by Willy Haas, a friend of both author and addressee. Milena had entrusted them to Haas when the Germans occupied Prague, and he published them in 1952. He wrote, "I have every reason to assume that Milena would have had no objection to their publication after her death. Many years later, however, Milena Jasinska's daughter, Jana Serna, disputed Hans' statement, claiming that neither her mother nor Kafka would have ever allowed the letters to be published. But by then the letters had already entered the Kafka canon. Moreover, in an article entitled Letters to Notable People, Milena herself expressed the idea that as long as our understanding of art is so imperfect and that we require more than just the artist's statement, as long as we must place our fingers in the wounds like Thomas, we have the right to convince ourselves that the wounds exist and that they are deep. Haas, on the other hand, feared that the letters might expose wounds other than Kafka's, and he chose to cut many passages he felt would injure certain people still alive at the time of publication, including himself. He did not indicate the omissions so that a fragmentary quality resulted, which was reinforced by the desultory arrangement of the letters that had not been dated, and the editor was far from trying to insist that his proposed order had succeeded beyond doubt in every detail. A new German edition, published in 1986 by Michael Miller and Jürgen Born, reinserted the missing fragments, creating a substantially larger text. Only 4 omissions were maintained, and their publication would be unlawful as well as indiscreet, because much of the new human is mundane. The expanded letters seem more human. Moreover, the restoration significantly facilitates reading, and as the new chronology devised by the editors, who had far better means at their disposal. The addition of an extensive critical apparatus further enhances the reader's understanding. This is essentially an English version of the Born-Miller edition. The new material it contained called for a new translation, one which would show a more informal, more personal Kafka. By including some of her own letters and essays, this book also hopes to convey a fuller portrait of Milena Jasinska, whose last name never appeared in the early edition.